It is 7 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, August 7th, 2019, in Morton, Mississippi. The shift whistle has just blown at the Koch Foods processing plant off Highway 80. Then the parking lot fills with vehicles that do not belong there. Unmarked Suburbans, government sedans, a line of white buses idling at the edge of the lot with their engines running. Men and women in olive green tactical vests stamped Police and HSI move toward every exit of the building at once. They have the blueprints. They know where the loading docks are, where the break rooms are, where the deboning line runs cold and wet under fluorescent light. Inside, hundreds of workers are already at their stations, knives moving, aprons on. Within 90 minutes, 680 of them will be in custody. By the end of this video, you'll understand how the federal government spent nearly a year building this single morning. The confidential informant inside the plant. The payroll records subpoenaed one company at a time. The reason agents chose this specific Wednesday out of the entire calendar. You'll also understand why, of the 680 people arrested that day, the men who signed their paychecks were not among them, and why it would take almost 2 full years before a single employer answered for any of it. Keep that in mind. The employers. We're coming back to them. Morton is a town of roughly 5,000 people in Scott County, in the piney middle of Mississippi. It is poultry country. Chicken processing is the economic spine of the region, and it runs on labor that is hard, cold, fast, and dangerous. The Koch Foods plant here employs around 3,000 people across its operations. Down the road in Carthage, in Canton, in Bay Springs, in Pelahatchie, in Sebastopol, the same story repeats. Paco Foods, PH Food, Pearl River Foods, A&B Incorporated. 7 plants in all spread across 6 towns. That word, 7, is the first thing that doesn't fit. Immigration raids, even big ones, usually hit one facility, one employer, one warrant, one location the agents can lock down. What Homeland Security Investigations is attempting on this Wednesday is 7 simultaneous operations across 100 miles of rural Mississippi, timed to the minute, so no plant can call ahead and warn the next. To do that, they've brought 600 agents into the state. 600 federal agents, staged overnight in hotels and staging areas across central Mississippi, briefed in the dark, rolling out before dawn, for a labor case about chicken plants. This is not a routine enforcement sweep. This is the single largest workplace immigration operation the United States has run in any one state in more than a decade. And the man who signs off on it has been waiting a long time to run it. His name is Mike Hurst. He is the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Mississippi, appointed in 2017. And he has said in public more than once that worksite enforcement is a priority in a way it simply had not been for years. The case that makes this morning possible was built by HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, the investigative arm of ICE, the part of the agency that does long, quiet, document-heavy work rather than knocking on apartment doors. They had been building it quietly for months. Building a raid like this doesn't start with the workers. It starts with the paper. HSI agents spend months pulling the employment records of these companies. The I-9 forms every worker fills out, the social security numbers submitted to payroll, the hiring documents. They run those numbers against federal databases, and a pattern emerges that they can prove in a courtroom. Numbers that belong to dead people. Numbers that belong to someone else entirely. Numbers issued to children. The same 9 digits appearing on 2 different workers in 2 different states. In the affidavits that will later be unsealed, agents describe workers using stolen and fabricated identities to hold their jobs. That is the legal spine of the whole operation. That work looks nothing like the morning it produces. It is a subpoena served on a payroll department, then a banker's box, then another. It is agents cross-referencing hire dates against termination dates, looking for the same name attached to two numbers or the same number attached to two names. It is noticing that a plant received notice years earlier that dozens of its submitted Social Security numbers did not match federal records, and asking what the company did next. Every one of those documents is a thread, and a case like this is built by pulling them one at a time until they braid into something a grand jury will sign. Nobody films that part. It takes months, and it happens in an office. But paper isn't enough to move on 7 plants at once, so they go inside. According to the search warrant affidavits, HSI develops sources with direct knowledge of the plants. In at least one facility, investigators describe information from a cooperating source, someone who could tell them how many unauthorized workers were on the floor and how the hiring actually happened behind the official paperwork. There are references to consensual recordings. There is surveillance. And there is one detail that tells you how carefully this was planned. The agents chose the day. They chose a Wednesday in the first week of August. That choice is the part of this story that will define everything that comes after. Because the first week of August in Scott County, Mississippi, is the week the schools open. Hold that thought. Because right now, at 7:30 in the morning, the parents don't know yet. Inside the Koch Foods plant in Morton, the raid unfolds fast and by the book. Agents secure the exits first. Nobody in, nobody out. Then they move on to the production floor. The line stops. Agents separate the workers, move them into the cafeteria, and process them in groups. Federal officers check identities against the lists they've already built. Agents zip-tie those confirmed to be in the country unlawfully, walk them out through the same parking lot they arrived in that morning, and load them onto the white buses. The buses have a destination. HSI has taken over a facility at the Mississippi National Guard Center in Flowood, near Jackson, and turned it into a mass processing site. Long tables, biometric scanners, folding chairs, agents working in shifts. 680 people cannot be booked out of a county jail. They have to be run through an assembly line of their own, fingerprinted, photographed, interviewed, their cases sorted into piles. Who gets held? Who gets a notice to appear? Who has a medical condition? Who has a child at home with no one to pick them up? There's a grim symmetry to that room worth naming out loud. These are people who spent their working lives standing at fixed stations on a moving line, performing one repeated task as product came past. Now they are the product on the line. Same logic, same bottleneck math. How many can you move through a station per hour? And what happens when intake outruns capacity downstream? The agency planned the seizure to the minute. What it planned less well was the part that came after the buses arrived, when people with folding chairs and a deadline had to sort 680 individual human situations. That last pile is bigger than anyone at the podium wants to admit. Across all 7 plants, the same scene plays out at the same time. At the PH Food plant in Morton, at Payco Foods in Canton and Bay Springs, at Pearl River Foods in Carthage, at A&B in Pelahatchie and Sebastopol. Agents on the floor, lines stopped, buses filling. By the time the operation winds down in the early afternoon, the count is official and staggering. Not 100, not 300. 680. Mike Hurst stands in front of the cameras that afternoon and does not soften it. He says that while people are welcome to come to the United States, they must do so legally, and that those who don't, and the businesses that knowingly hire them, will face consequences. It is a clean, hard message, delivered on the biggest worksite enforcement day in years. On its own terms, it is a complete success. 7 plants, 680 arrests, 0 shots fired. a logistical operation of remarkable precision, executed exactly as designed. But here is what the afternoon press conference did not lead with. By the time Hearst is speaking, in the towns of Scott and Leake and Madison County, the school buses are already running their afternoon routes. They are dropping children off at homes where no adult is coming back. Remember the date, the first week of August, the first day of school. Think about what that means inside a school building. It is the week when nothing is settled yet. Rosters are still being corrected. Teachers are still learning names. The emergency contact cards in the front office are half filled or a year out of date. Administrators in these districts spent that afternoon trying to work out which children could safely be sent home and which could not, using paperwork that had existed for less than 48 hours. Some schools held kids in the office and started calling down contact lists that rang and rang. A first day of school is supposed to be the most forgettable kind of day. For hundreds of children in central Mississippi, it became the day they will describe for the rest of their lives. This is the part of the story that turned a federal enforcement operation into a national one. In Morton, at a gymnasium and a community center, volunteers and neighbors begin taking in children whose parents were bused to Flowood that morning. Some kids came home to locked doors. Some were pulled off buses by relatives who'd heard. A local Mexican restaurant owner in Morton, along with church volunteers, sets up food and a place to sleep for children who have nowhere to go, because the alternative is a child sitting alone on a porch until dark. A bystander with a phone captures the moment that will define August 7th, 2019, in the public memory. An 11-year-old girl named Magdalena Gomez Gregorio, standing outside, sobbing, is recorded pleading into the camera. She asks the government to have a heart, says her father is not a criminal, and says she wants him back. Her father, Manuel, was arrested that morning at the plant. That video runs on every national network by nightfall. It reframes the entire operation because the government's story is about identity fraud and worksite law, and the video's story is a child asking where her father went. Both of those things are true at the same time. That is what makes this case so hard and so watched. Now, the obvious question. If the crime the government spent months documenting was that these companies hired unauthorized workers using stolen numbers on a scale large enough to justify 600 agents, then where were the companies? On August 7th, 2019, of the 680 people arrested, every single one was a worker. A line worker, a deboner, a sanitation employee on the night shift. Not one plant manager was arrested that day, not one human resources director, not one executive, not one owner. The people let out in zip ties were the people at the bottom of the exact hiring scheme the affidavits described. The people at the top of it drove home that night. That is the fact that hangs over this entire case. Sit with it for a second. The legal theory required an employer. The arrests produced only employees. Within 24 hours, ICE itself starts adjusting the picture. By the next day, the agency announces it has already released roughly 300 of the 680, many of them processed, given ankle monitors or notices to appear in immigration court, and let go on humanitarian grounds, largely because they were sole caregivers for children. Think about the arithmetic there. Nearly half of the people arrested in the largest worksite operation in a decade were released within a day because taking them meant leaving American-born children with no parent at all. The government had the numbers to make 680 arrests. It did not have anywhere to put the consequences. So the operation splits into two stories that move at two very different speeds. The first story is fast. It is the story of the workers. In the weeks that follow, prosecutors in the Southern District of Mississippi begin charging some of those arrested not with violent crime, but with document offenses, using false identities, using stolen social security numbers, illegal re-entry after a prior removal. Many are deported, others take plea deals. Some fight their cases in immigration court for years. This story is measured in individual case numbers, quiet hearings, and families that either reassemble or don't. The second story is slow. It is the story we were promised at the start. The employers. It moves at a glacial pace because building a criminal case against a company is not the same as arresting the people standing on its floor. You have to prove that managers knew. You have to prove intent, up the chain, in writing, beyond a reasonable doubt. That takes time that a raid does not. Here's the narrator's one honest opinion in this whole story. A morning that could put 680 workers on buses, but took 2 years to touch a single manager, tells you exactly where the machinery of enforcement is built to point, and where it is built to hesitate. It does point upward eventually, just slowly. It is not until August 2021, 2 full years after the raid, that federal prosecutors announce charges against individuals on the employer side. Managers and human resources personnel at some of the raided companies are charged with conspiracy and with knowingly employing unauthorized workers. At least one of the corporate entities itself, PH Food Incorporated, enters a guilty plea to a federal charge tied to the hiring of workers it was not permitted to employ, and agrees to pay a fine as part of resolving the case. That is the resolution of the open loop. The employers were not immune. But the distance between the two events, 680 workers arrested in 90 minutes on one August morning, and a handful of managers charged 24 months later, is the real measurement of this story. One side of the ledger was cleared before lunch. The other took 2 years and produced a fraction of the names. You might be thinking that the raid itself, whatever the fallout, at least worked as intended, that the plants were emptied of unauthorized labor and the law was enforced. The ground-level reality complicates the clean version again. Within days of the raid, some of these same plants were reportedly hiring. The lines had to keep running. The chicken doesn't stop. A processing plant that loses hundreds of workers in a single morning does not shut down. It reopens the next shift and puts out a call for labor, which raises the uncomfortable question the operation never fully answered. If the demand for this labor is permanent, what exactly did a single morning of arrests change about the demand? There is one more detail from that day that the official summary of the operation did not dwell on, and it belongs in the record. The children who were gathered in that gymnasium in Morton, fed by a restaurant owner and church volunteers because the state's largest enforcement operation in a decade had no plan for them, were, overwhelmingly, United States citizens. Born here. American kids sitting on cots waiting for parents who had been loaded onto buses 2 towns over. The operation was planned to the minute. 600 agents, 7 plants, staged in the dark, timed so no one could warn the next facility. Every logistical variable was accounted for, except the buses that ran that afternoon on their normal schedule, carrying children home to empty houses. Manuel Gomez, the father of the 11-year-old girl in the video, was among those released within days, on humanitarian grounds, to return to his children while his case proceeded. Others were not so fortunate, and their families waited far longer, or not at all. Go back to 7 o'clock that morning. The whistle, the wet, cold floor, the knives already moving, the buses idling at the edge of the lot with their engines running. From the moment those engines turned over, the outcome of the day was already decided. 680 people, 90 minutes, a decade's record broken before the school day even started. What was never decided What no one in that parking lot had planned for was who would be standing in the driveways that afternoon when the buses came back the other way and found no one home.